The only truth in this place is the green glow of the monitors, each a sterile window into the sprawling, silent guts of Red River Logistics Complex 7. They say cameras don't lie, but I've learned that truth here is a malleable thing, something that shifts with the shadows and the hum of unseen machinery. My name is Jake Morgan, and for the last 7 months, I've been the night shift sentinel, the disembodied eye watching over miles of concrete and steel in the dead heart of the Nevada desert. The pay is barely enough to keep the lights on, barely enough to afford the next round of experimental treatments for Rachel, my little sister. Her laughter, bright and defiant, even as the illness tries to steal it, is the only reason I subject myself to this nocturnal purgatory, this symphony of silence and flickering images. Mr. Richard Blake, my supervisor, is a man carved from granite and old regrets. During my orientation, a terse 10-minute affair in this very surveillance room, he handed me a battered, heavy-duty tablet. Its screen displayed the Nocturnal Vigilance Protocols, a document that read more like a grimoire than an employee handbook. "Follow these, Morgan," he'd rasped, his voice like sandpaper. "Every single one, to the letter. Your employment, and perhaps more, depends on it. The complex has peculiarities." He never elaborated, and his eyes, like chips of obsidian, dared no further questions. Peculiarities. That was one word for the cold dread that seemed to seep from the concrete walls, a dread that even the industrial-grade coffee couldn't quite dispel. The surveillance room itself is a concrete box, buried deep within the administrative wing. A bank of monitors dominates one wall, a mosaic of grayscale feeds displaying empty corridors, cavernous warehouse floors stacked high with anonymous crates, and deserted loading docks that stretch into the inky blackness of the desert night. The air is perpetually chilled, recycled, and tasting faintly of ozone and dust. My only companions are the rhythmic click of my keyboard as I log hourly all-clear signals, the low thrum of the server racks behind a reinforced door, and the ever-present, almost subliminal whisper of the ventilation system, a sound that sometimes tricks my tired mind into hearing voices, or worse, Rachel's pained breaths. This particular shift began like any other. The slow drive through the desolate landscape as dusk bled into night, the perfunctory check-in with the equally morose day shift guy, and the familiar ritual of settling into the worn operator's chair, the tablet already glowing with the first set of protocols for the 00 to 80 watch. The complex is a city unto itself, a labyrinth of numbered sectors and color-coded zones. Sector Gamma, docks 01 through 12, corridors Alpha through Zeta. My job is to observe, to report, to be the silent, unseen witness. But a witness to what? The official line is asset protection, loss prevention. But the sheer scale of this place, the layers of security, and those damn rules, they all scream something else. Something far more significant. The initial hours always pass in a deceptive calm. I track the occasional automated cleaning bot gliding through the aisles, its red sensor light a lonely firefly in the vast darkness. I watch the desert winds buffet the exterior fences on the perimeter cameras, tumbleweeds skittering like ghostly animals. The rules for this early part of the night are usually mundane. 0115, confirm all Sector Delta loading bay doors are sealed and magnetically locked. Log confirmation code Delta Seal confirm. 020, run diagnostic on camera array C, corridors 10 through 19. report any signal degradation exceeding 0.5%. Tedious, but the tedium itself feels like a thin veneer over something else, something waiting. Rachel's medical bills are a mountain, and each keystroke here, each hour endured, is a small chip at its base. Her condition, a rare neurological disorder, is relentless, chipping. The tablet itself is an anomaly. Old, scarred, its casing a dull, military-grade plastic. The Nocturnal Vigilance Protocols app is the only thing it runs, its interface stark and utilitarian. Rules sometimes update mid-shift, new addendums appearing with a soft, almost apologetic chime. Some are simple, like Rule X, at 0230, ensure the ambient temperature in cold storage unit B7 is within parameters. Do not physically inspect, rely solely on sensor data. Others are less simple, much less. They hint at a vigilance directed not against human intruders, but against something else entirely, something intrinsic to the complex itself. I remember Blake's final words before he left me to my first shift, his gaze lingering on the darkest monitor for a moment too long. The complex remembers, Morgan. It watches the watchers. Stick to the protocols. They're not just for the company's benefit. A shiver traced its way down my spine then, and it returns now, a familiar companion in the lonely hours. The digital clock on the main display ticks over to 0252. The deeper part of the night is beginning. The hours when the silence feels most alive, when the shadows on the screens seem to lengthen and deepen, not just with the angle of the moon, but with something else. What truly lurks in the unlit corners of Red River Logistics Complex 7? What peculiarities demand such arcane rules, such unwavering adherence? I scroll through the active protocols for the upcoming hour, a knot tightening in my stomach. One rule, highlighted in amber, seems to pulse faintly on the tablet screen, a silent premonition. Is it just my tired eyes, or is the hum of the servers behind me growing fractionally louder, more expectant? The night is young, and already the weight of it, the weight of this place, presses down. The stale, recycled air in the surveillance room suddenly felt colder, the kind of chill that doesn't register on a thermostat, but pricks at the back of your neck. It was 0253, an hour when the complex usually settled into its deepest slumber, the hum of the climate control and the distant groan of settling foundations the only sounds. My gaze, habitually sweeping across the grid of monitors, snagged on camera 07. This particular feed covered Corridor 13, a long, narrow passage in the older, seldom used Sector Epsilon, a place perpetually draped in an unnerving twilight due to chronically faulty lighting fixtures that no one ever seemed to prioritize fixing. And there, nestled in the deepest pool of shadow where the corridor bent out of sight, was something. It wasn't clearly defined, more an impression of verticality, a subtle disruption in the grain of the low-light image. A trick of the light? A stack of forgotten boxes? My training, my ingrained routine, urged me to reach for the joystick, to engage the camera's pan-tilt-zoom. But then, a flicker of memory, a cold premonition. I glanced down at the tablet, its screen already displaying the active protocols. My finger, almost of its own accord, scrolled to the entry highlighted in a sickly amber. Rule 01, Camera 07, Corridor 13. If a static humanoid figure is detected in Corridor 13 via Camera 07 between 0250 and 013, do not engage optical or digital zoom. log as pattern interference 713, and divert gaze from the monitor for 60 seconds. Zoom may fix the anomaly. My breath hitched. A figure. The protocol explicitly used that word. This wasn't about a misplaced palette or a faulty sensor. The phrasing, "fix the anomaly," sent a jolt of unease through me, a visceral understanding that looking too closely, focusing too intently, was not just against procedure, but actively dangerous. My hand, which had been hovering over the zoom controls, recoiled as if burned. The figure, if it was a figure, remained utterly still, a darker slash in the already pervasive gloom. It was tall, impossibly so if it were human, and unnaturally slender, like a charcoal sketch elongated and starved of dimension. With trembling fingers, I typed, "Pattern interference 7-13 into the digital log, the click of the keys unnaturally loud in the sudden silence of my own thoughts. The timestamp read 0254. Then the hardest part, deviating my gaze. Forcing my eyes away from monitor 07 felt like fighting against a physical current. Every instinct screamed to keep watching, to understand, to define the undefined. But Blake's warning, the sheer, cold certainty in his voice, echoed in my mind. The complex has peculiarities. This, undoubtedly, was one of them. I focused on the feed from the brightly lit main lobby, camera 01, an oasis of sterile normality in contrast to the creeping dread emanating from Sector Epsilon. The 60 seconds stretched into an eternity. Each tick of the digital clock on the wall felt like a hammer blow against my composure. Was it still there? Had it moved? The term static in the rule implied immobility. But what if that was a test? What if the true danger lay in the assumption of stillness? My mind raced, replaying the brief, shadowy glimpse. There was no discernible detail, no face, no clothing, just that unnerving, elongated silhouette. It was the kind of image that would etch itself onto the back of your eyelids, a permanent resident in your nightmares. The very act of not looking, of not knowing, was a peculiar form of torture. The chime from my console announcing the top of the minute, 60 seconds precisely, made me jump. My gaze snapped back to camera 07, half expecting, half dreading to find the corridor empty, or worse, the figure closer, somehow aware of my forced ignorance. But corridor 13 was empty, utterly empty. The deep shadows where the figure had stood were just shadows now, undisturbed, mundane. A wave of relief so potent it left me lightheaded washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh surge of unease. Had it ever been there? Was this job, the isolation, the constant low-level stress, finally getting to me? But the log entry was there, undeniable. Pattern interference 7-13. And the rule, so specific, so prescient. This wasn't a hallucination born of fatigue. This was the complex, showing a sliver of its true face. The tablet chimed softly again, a new notification. Not a rule update, but a system message. Sensor array in Sector Epsilon, Corridor 13, reports localized temperature drop of 7.2 degrees Celsius. Anomaly duration, 63 seconds. Correlating with pattern 713 log. No further action required by vigilance operator. My blood ran cold. A temperature drop. Localized. The figure hadn't just been a visual anomaly. It had a physical, measurable effect on its environment. I stared at the empty corridor on the screen, the shadows no longer appearing mundane, but pregnant with unseen possibilities. The rule hadn't just been a precaution, it was a containment measure, a way of interacting, or rather, not interacting, with something that could alter its surroundings. The phrase, "fix the anomaly," took on a more sinister meaning. What happened if it was fixed? Did it become more real, more permanent? The questions swirled, unanswered, leaving a residue of cold fear. This wasn't just about watching empty hallways anymore. The first thread of the ordinary had snapped. The night, which had always been unsettling, now felt actively hostile, sentient. The rules, once a source of bizarre annoyance, now seemed like desperately constructed levees against an encroaching unseen tide. And I was the one standing watch, armed only with a tablet and a growing certainty that I was in far deeper than I could ever have imagined. What other pattern interferences awaited me in the labyrinthine depths of Red River Logistics Complex 7? And how long could I keep looking away? The encounter with the Pattern Interference 7-13 left an indelible mark on the subsequent nights. The oppressive silence of the complex no longer felt empty, but charged, as if the very air vibrated with unseen currents. I found myself scrutinizing the feeds with a new, almost painful. Several nights later, the next significant deviation occurred. It wasn't visual this time, but auditory, or rather, sub-auditory. I was reviewing footage from Sector Gamma, a vast storage area filled with towering racks of palletized goods, when a low, rhythmic hum began to permeate the surveillance room. It wasn't coming from the servers, nor from the ventilation. Those sounds were familiar, part of the room's baseline symphony. This was different, a thrumming that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my sinuses, causing a dull, throbbing headache to bloom behind my eyes. I checked the audio feeds from Sector Gamma. The directional microphones picked up nothing beyond the usual ambient noise. The hum intensified, and with it came a faint, almost inaudible series of whispers, like dry leaves skittering across concrete, yet somehow layered, polyphonic. I felt a prickle of sweat on my palms. My gaze flicked to the tablet. Rule 02, Auditory Anomalies, Gamma Frequency. If a rhythmic hum or whispers in gamma frequency are picked up by directional microphones, but no source is visible on corresponding cameras, initiate acoustic dampening protocol Delta 9. Do not attempt to manually isolate the sound source. This may amplify its influence. The key phrase, picked up by directional microphones. But I wasn't hearing it through the system. I was hearing it, feeling it, directly in the room, or perhaps in my own head. A wave of nausea washed over me. Was this a new type of anomaly, one not yet cataloged in the protocols? Or was my own perception becoming unreliable? The whispers seemed to coalesce, forming indistinct words just below the threshold of comprehension, teasing at the edges of meaning. Then I noticed a small, almost overlooked subclause in Rule 02. Or, if such phenomena are perceived directly by the operator in the control room without systemic corroboration. My heart hammered. They knew. The architects of these rules, whoever they were, had anticipated even this direct, insidious intrusion. I fumbled with the tablet, my fingers slick, and activated Protocol Delta 9. A low, counter-frequency tone emitted from hidden speakers in the room, a sound designed, I supposed, to cancel out the anomalous frequencies. The rhythmic hum faltered, the whispers receding like a tide pulling away from the shore. The headache began to subside, but the feeling of being invasively listened to, of my own senses being a potential vector for whatever lurked here, lingered like a foul taste. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was no longer a mere absence of sound, but an active, watchful presence. The complex wasn't just a place of strange sights. It was a place of insidious sounds, of pressures on the mind itself. The following week, the challenge escalated, shifting from the sensory to the deeply personal. I was in the middle of a routine system check, the clock on the wall reading 0317, when a text overlay, stark white against the grayscale feed of Docking Bay 4, blinked into existence. "Jake, it's Rachel. I'm scared. The doctors, they're not telling you everything. Please, call me. I need you." My blood turned to ice. Rachel, her name, her fear, splashed across the cold, impersonal interface of my workstation. My hand shot towards my personal phone, a cheap burner I kept for emergencies, my mind racing. How? How could this message appear here? Then, the cold logic of the protocols, the ingrained caution of months spent in this place, asserted itself. I forced myself to look at the tablet, my breath catching in my throat. Rule 03. System overlay text messages. Ignore any personal messages, familiar names, or pleas for help appearing on monitor text overlays unless preceded by the daily authentication code Sigma Blue, variable numerical sequence. Responses may validate a perceptual bridge. I scanned the message again. No Sigma Blue, no sequence number, just her name, her plea, designed to bypass every defense, every rule. The agony of that moment was indescribable. Every fiber of my being screamed to call her, to disregard the cold, impersonal instruction on the tablet. What if it was real? What if she truly needed me, and I, bound by these arcane rules, failed her? The image of her small, pale face, her eyes wide with the fear she tried so hard to hide from me, flashed in my mind. But then, another image. The elongated shadow in Corridor 13, the insidious whispers, the chilling certainty that this place was toying with me, probing for weaknesses, using my deepest love as a weapon. Validate a perceptual bridge. The words were chillingly precise. With a hand that shook so violently I could barely control it, I cleared the overlay from the monitor. I did not call. I did not respond. I simply sat there, the silence of the room pressing in, the weight of my decision crushing me. Was I protecting Rachel, or was I abandoning her to some digital phantom, some cruel echo conjured by the complex? The line between vigilance and paranoia, between protocol and madness, was becoming terrifyingly thin. The entities here, whatever they were, weren't just passive anomalies. They were intelligent, adaptive, and knew exactly where to strike to inflict the most damage. The shift ended with a leaden dawn. As I drove away from Red River, the rising sun seemed a mockery, its warmth unable to penetrate the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I called Rachel's hospital as soon as I had signal, my voice hoarse. The on-duty nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, assured me Rachel was stable, had slept through the night. Relief warred with a cold, sickening realization. The message had been a lie, a sophisticated, targeted, emotional assault. The complex wasn't just a place I worked, it was a battlefield, and I was an unwilling, ill-equipped soldier, armed only with rules I barely understood, fighting an enemy I couldn't see. The incident with the false message from Rachel fundamentally altered my perception of the job. It was no longer about enduring the hours for a paycheck. It was about surviving them. The complex wasn't just haunted by passive specters, it was actively malevolent, or at least its inhabitants were. My trust in my own senses, already eroded, was now shattered. Every flicker on a screen, every unusual sound, every deviation from the expected became a potential trap, a new test orchestrated by an unseen intelligence. Mr. Blake's laconic warnings about peculiarities seemed like a gross understatement. This place was a carefully managed nexus of something deeply, fundamentally wrong. A few nights later, the true scale of that wrongness began to reveal itself. Not through a direct assault, but through a system-wide, chillingly orchestrated event. It was just past 03:30, the deadest hour of the night, when the main monitor bank, displaying a dozen different feeds, simultaneously flickered. For a horrifying instant, every single screen went black, plunging the surveillance room into an unnerving absolute darkness, broken only by the faint emergency glow of the tablet in my lap. My heart leaped into my throat. A power surge? A catastrophic system failure? I fumbled for the manual override controls, my mind already cycling through emergency protocols. Then, just as suddenly as they died, the monitors flared back to life. But the images they displayed were not the familiar corridors and warehouses. Every screen, all 12 of them, showed the exact same thing. My operator's chair, empty. The lighting was identical to the room I was in, the angle of the camera feed seemingly from just above and behind where I was sitting. I was in the chair, yet every monitor insisted I wasn't. The image remained for a beat, 2, 3. A cold dread, sharper than any I'd felt before, pierced through me. This was not a glitch. This was a message. My fingers flew to the tablet, already anticipating the relevant protocol. Rule 04. Empty monitor synchronicity. Control room. If all main monitors simultaneously display the image of your empty operator's chair for more than 3 seconds, immediately activate the Omega emergency lockdown on your console. Select Safe Haven B02 on the evacuation panel. Do not look back when leaving the control room. The image on the screens persisted. 4 seconds now. I slammed my palm onto the large red Omega lockdown button on my console. Alarms, muted but insistent, began to chime throughout the administrative wing. The heavy steel door to the surveillance room hissed and thudded shut, its magnetic locks engaging with a definitive series of clicks. The evacuation panel beside the door lit up, a small schematic of the immediate area glowing. Safe Haven B02 pulsed in green. It was a small reinforced room adjacent to the server core, designed, I'd always assumed, for surviving a catastrophic fire or structural collapse. Now its purpose seemed far more ominous. I scrambled from my chair, the final chilling injunction of Rule 04 screaming in my mind. Do not look back. The urge to glance back at the monitors, to see if the image of the empty chair remained, was almost overwhelming. But the sheer, unadulterated terror that the synchronized display had invoked was a powerful deterrent. Whatever had orchestrated that, whatever could project such a specific, targeted illusion, was not something I wanted to engage with directly. I reached the door of Safe Haven B02, a thick steel plate with a keypad and a biometric scanner. My hand trembled as I punched in the access code Blake had drilled into me during orientation, a code I'd never expected to use. The heavy door swung inward with a pneumatic sigh, revealing a cramped, windowless space, little more than a closet, equipped with a single chair, a wall-mounted emergency communications panel, and its own independent air supply. I stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind me. The silence in the refuge was absolute, a stark contrast to the low hum and click of the surveillance room. It was the silence of a tomb. Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. The emergency comms panel flickered to life, a secure channel icon glowing. Mr. Blake's voice, gravelly and devoid of any surprise, crackled through the small speaker. "Morgan, report status." I stammered out what had happened, the synchronized empty chair display, the activation of Omega Lockdown. There was a long pause. "Understood," Blake finally said. "Remain in B02 until further notice. We have an unscheduled variance in Sector Gamma. Seems our mannequin decided to stretch its legs. Caused a bit of a resonance cascade through the primary sensor network." The mannequin. Rule 05. The mannequin, Sector Gamma, Dock 04, the figure resembling a store mannequin in Sector Gamma, Dock 04, is not a mannequin. Do not log its subtle movements as an anomaly unless it leaves the demarcated perimeter of Dock 04. If the mannequin is sighted in any other sector, notify Supervisor Karras, Secure Channel 1, with the code Sculptural Transgression. Do not make direct eye contact if encountered outside Sector Gamma. I had only ever seen it on camera, a disturbingly lifelike but always motionless figure propped near some discarded shipping crates. Blake's casual mention of it stretching its legs sent a fresh wave of cold through me. "Resonance cascade?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Is that what happened to the monitors?" Another pause. "Something like that," Morgan replied, his tone giving nothing away. "The complex, it reacts. The patterns here, they can get entangled. Your observation post is a sensitive node. Just stay put, we're recalibrating." The line went dead. Recalibrating. Entangled patterns. Sensitive node. The carefully chosen anodyne words did little to mask the terrifying implication. The warehouse itself, or the things within it, were interconnected in ways I couldn't fathom, and I was no longer just a watcher of screens. I was a component, a sensitive node, within a system far larger and stranger than I had ever conceived. The rules weren't just about managing isolated incidents. They were about maintaining a delicate, precarious balance within a living, breathing, and potentially hostile ecosystem. The empty chair incident wasn't just a scare tactic. It was a demonstration of capability, a warning that my very presence, my perception, could be manipulated, even erased, by the forces at play within Red River. The truth of this place was beginning to bleed through the cracks of the mundane, and it was a truth that hinted at a conflict, a form of containment far beyond simple warehouse security. The confines of Safe Haven B02 became my prison for what felt like an eternity, though the emergency chronometer on the comms panel insisted it was only a little over an hour. The silence, once a welcome respite from the surveillance room's oppressive hum, now pressed in on me, amplifying the frantic thumping of my own heart and the whirlwind of increasingly dark thoughts. Blake's clipped explanation about the mannequin and the resonance cascade offered no comfort, only a deeper sense of unease. If a supposedly inanimate object could cause such a system-wide disruption, what other horrors did this complex harbor? And what, precisely, was my role in all of this, beyond being a sensitive node, to be occasionally locked away? The desperation that had driven me to take this job, the gnawing anxiety over Rachel's deteriorating health, and the crushing weight of her medical bills began to curdle into a bitter resentment. The pay, which had once seemed a lifeline, now felt like blood money, hush money for my complicity in whatever this place was. Was I truly helping Rachel by subjecting myself to this nightly torment? Or was I merely trading my sanity for a pittance that would never be enough? The false message, the one that had used her name, her vulnerability, echoed in my mind. They learn with the pain. Whose pain? Mine? Or the pain of others who had sat in that chair before me? Fueled by a reckless mix of fear and frustration, I began to explore the limited interface of the emergency comms panel. It was mostly locked down, offering only secure voice channels to Blake and a few other restricted extensions. However, a forgotten maintenance submenu, likely overlooked in the last system update, provided access to a limited archive of operational logs and personnel files. Most were encrypted beyond my ability to crack, but a few older, less secured entries flickered into view. Fragmented reports of anomalous luminous phenomena, Sector Delta, unexplained equipment malfunction, cold storage C9, and then a name, Dr. Emily Carter. Dr. Carter's personnel file was brief, almost redacted. Former research consultant, assigned to Project Black Veil. Her access had been terminated, internal review pending, nearly 2 years ago. A single corrupted data fragment attached to her file contained what looked like a personal log entry, barely recoverable. The Black Veil signatures are memetics, not just of patterns, but of intent. Karis suspects containment protocols are insufficient. They're not just shadows, they're echoes. The rest was unreadable, a jumble of garbled code. Memetics, echoes, Project Black Veil. The name itself was chilling. Then a deeper dive, a gamble. I knew Blake's primary access code for routine system overrides. I'd seen him punch it in countless times on the main console when a sensor glitched or a feed needed manual rerouting. It was a simple alphanumeric sequence, something related to his military service, easily memorable. On a hunch, I tried it on a locked section of his personal directory within the comms panel. To my shock, it worked. A small encrypted text file sat there, unassuming. Its title, Carter Debrief Notes, Internal Only. My breath caught. This was it. This was Blake's private record. The notes were sparse, almost clinical, but they painted a horrifying picture. Carter had apparently theorized that the shadow constructs, the first time I'd seen that term, were not just random occurrences, but a form of non-corporeal intelligence that interacted with, perhaps even fed on, complex information systems and the cognitive energies of observers. Her Project Black Veil had been an attempt to understand their propagation and, crucially, their vulnerabilities. One line, heavily underlined by Blake in the digital notes, leapt out at me. Carter posited extreme emotional states, fear, grief, despair, act as beacons or amplifiers for construct manifestation. Conversely, focused, detached observation, per protocol, may starve or dampen their coherence. So the rules, they weren't arbitrary. They weren't just to protect the complex's assets. They were a form of cognitive discipline, a shield. And my fear, my desperation for Rachel, I was a walking, talking beacon. The false message hadn't just been cruel, it had been a calculated attempt to amplify my emotional state, to make me a more receptive target, or perhaps a more potent source of whatever they drew from us. The tablet, with its cold, precise instructions, was my only defense, a set of blinkers designed to keep me from looking too deeply into the abyss, from feeding it with my own terror. Another of Blake's notes mentioned Carter's growing conviction that the complex itself was not merely a site of manifestation, but a kind of farm or processing center, though for what, the notes didn't specify. She'd apparently become increasingly erratic, convinced that the constructs were learning, adapting to their containment methods at an alarming rate. Her termination had been less about a review and more about silencing a voice that was asking too many dangerous questions, a voice that was perhaps getting too close to an unthinkable truth. They learn with the pain. Carter's pain? The pain of those they processed? The weight of this knowledge was suffocating. I wasn't just a security guard. I was bait, a lab rat in a monstrous experiment. My emotional well-being, a variable in some ghastly equation. The money for Rachel, my sole justification for enduring this nightmare, now seemed tainted, a perverse reward for my unwitting participation. The trust I'd placed in Blake, however grudging, fractured. He wasn't just a gruff supervisor, he was a keeper of secrets, a warden in this prison of shadows, fully aware of the risks, yet sending me in night after night. The internal conflict was a raging storm. Flee? But to where? And how would I then help Rachel? Stay? And become another casualty, another footnote in Blake's secret files? The walls of Safe Haven B02 seemed to press in, the silence no longer a comfort, but a judgment. Blake's voice finally crackled over the comms panel in Safe Haven B02, nearly an hour and a half after he'd locked me in. "Morgan, situation stabilized. Sector Gamma is quiescent. You can return to the surveillance room. Resume standard protocols." His tone was flat, devoid of any reassurance, as if discussing a minor inventory discrepancy rather than an event that had necessitated an emergency lockdown. The casual mention of the mannequin being quiescent did little to ease the knot of ice in my stomach. Quiescent didn't mean gone. It meant waiting. The information I'd gleaned from his private files, from Dr. Carter's fragmented warnings, painted his calm in a newly sinister light. Stepping out of the refuge and back into the main surveillance room was like emerging into a different world, or rather, the same world subtly, dreadfully altered. The primary lights, usually a harsh, unwavering fluorescent white, were flickering erratically, casting an unsettling stroboscopic effect across the consoles and monitors. The air was heavy, carrying a faint, acrid scent like burnt electronics, or perhaps ozone after a lightning strike. The hum of the servers behind their reinforced door seemed louder, more agitated, a discordant thrum that vibrated through the floor, up my legs and into my teeth. My illusion of safety, of the surveillance room as a detached, sterile observation post, was irrevocably shattered. I sat back in my operator's chair, the worn cushioning offering no comfort. The monitors, too, seemed wrong. The feeds were stable, but the shadows in the familiar corridors and warehouses appeared deeper, more viscous, as if the darkness itself had gained substance. I tried to focus on the protocols displayed on the tablet, tried to slip back into the routine, but my hands were clammy, my gaze darting nervously from screen to screen. The knowledge of Project Blackveil, of the mimetic nature of the shadow constructs, of Dr. Carter's fate, had become a suffocating shroud. Every flicker, every glitch, was no longer a potential malfunction, but a possible manifestation. Then, one of the auxiliary monitors, usually displaying a static schematic of the complex's HVAC system, blinked and resolved into a live feed. It was Mr. Blake, or a perfect simulacrum of him, seated in what looked like his cramped office down the hall. He looked directly into the camera, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Morgan," his voice issued from my console speakers, clear and calm, yet with an underlying resonance that was subtly off. The audio wasn't perfectly synced with his lip movements, a fractional delay that was deeply unsettling. "Just wanted to check in, make sure you're comfortable." My throat went dry. This wasn't a scheduled check-in. Blake rarely used video comms, preferring the impersonal crackle of the secure voice channel. "Everything's nominal, sir," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to project the detached calm the protocols demanded. The Blake on the screen nodded slowly. "Good, good. You know, Jake, Rachel is a strong girl, so resilient. That new experimental therapy, it's showing promise, isn't it? Such a shame it's so financially demanding." My blood ran cold. I had never discussed the specifics of Rachel's therapy or its cost with Blake or with anyone at Red River. The smile on the screen widened, stretching just a fraction too far, the skin around his eyes crinkling in a way that wasn't quite human. "She misses you, Jake. Worries about you, out here all alone in the dark. She told me so herself, just this evening. Said she keeps having these dreams of shadows and cold places. She just wants you to come home. Forget these silly rules. They don't really matter, do they? Not when family is at stake." The voice was a perfect imitation of Blake's gravelly tone, yet imbued with a cloying, false sympathy that made my skin crawl. This was not Blake. This was it, the construct, using his image, his voice, armed with knowledge it should not possess. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my chest. I glanced at the main monitor bank. On camera C-17, which covered the main corridor leading to the administrative offices, I saw it, the mannequin. But it wasn't propped in its usual spot in Sector Gamma. It was moving. Not walking, but gliding, its impossibly smooth, featureless form advancing with an unnatural, terrifying grace directly towards the surveillance wing, towards me. The protocols, the lockdown, Blake's reassurances, all of it had been a lie, a deception. The illusion of control, of safety within these walls, had been utterly, catastrophically demolished. The Blake on the monitor chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "No need to look so alarmed, Jake. We just want to understand. Your patterns are interesting. So much focused grief, such dedication. Dr. Carter was never quite so compelling." The mention of Carter, delivered with that same predatory calm, confirmed my worst fears. They had her, or they were her, in some horrifying, assimilated way. The lights in the room flickered violently, then died completely, plunging me into a suffocating blackness, broken only by the malevolent glow of the monitor displaying the smiling, false Blake, and the distant, rhythmic scraping sound of the mannequin drawing. The rules were a cage, but they were also, I now realized, a very thin shield. And that shield had just been shattered. The complex wasn't just a place of shadows, it was a place of active, intelligent predation, and I was no longer an observer, but the observed, the target. The cold, hard certainty of my impending doom settled over me. There were no protocols for this, no contingency plans for when the Watchers themselves became the prey, For when the very fabric of perceived reality was torn asunder by the things that lurked just beyond the reach of the cameras, or worse, within them. The oppressive darkness of the surveillance room was absolute, a physical weight pressing down on me. Only the single monitor displaying the leering face of the Blake construct cast an eerie, pulsating glow, its false sympathy now an open mockery. The scraping, dragging sound of the mannequin in the corridor outside was growing louder, closer, each rasp a nail hammered into the coffin of my hope. My mind raced, a maelstrom of terror and desperate calculation. The protocols had failed, or rather, I had been deemed a target beyond their protective scope. The carefully constructed reality of my job, the illusion of a detached observational role, had crumbled to dust. Then, a fragment of Dr. Carter's corrupted log entry, something I'd barely registered in my frantic search in Safe Haven BO2, surfaced in my memory. My medic, respond to focused observation, but also susceptible to cognitive dissonance. Paradoxical input can induce temporary decoherence. Paradoxical input, a long shot, a desperate gamble. But what other options did I have? The mannequin was almost at the door. The Blake construct was still speaking, its voice a venomous caress, detailing Rachel's supposed fears, her fabricated pleas for me to abandon my post. It was trying to break me, to amplify that beacon of emotional distress Carter had warned about. "If you're really Mr. Blake," I yelled, my voice cracking, "then you know the override sequence for a Level 3 containment breach during a simultaneous redundancy failure in the primary server core. And you'd know that Protocol Omega, the one I just activated, explicitly forbids any non-essential personnel, including supervisors not physically present in the crisis hub, from initiating video communication with an active vigilance operator. So either you're violating multiple high-level security directives, which would trigger an automatic SDD alert, or you're not Mr. Blake at all. And if Rachel is so desperate for me to come home, why are you telling me instead of her calling my personal emergency line, the one Blake himself authorized for family crises?" The effect was instantaneous and startling. The image of Blake on the monitor flickered violently, its features momentarily blurring, elongating, the calm expression contorting into something that was not quite a snarl, not quite a scream, but a silent rictus of confusion? Indecision? The perfectly modulated voice dissolved into a high-pitched shriek of pure static, a sound that clawed at my eardrums. "Logical contradiction detected. Parameter conflict. Recalibrating. Recalibrating. Error. Error. Corruption imminent." The words, no longer in Blake's voice, but a synthesized, multi-layered chorus, blared from the speakers before the monitor displaying the construct exploded in a shower of sparks and acrid smoke, plunging that corner of the room into deeper blackness. The scraping outside the door stopped. For a blessed moment there was silence, broken only by my ragged breathing and the frantic, irregular popping of failing electrical components around me. Then a new sound, a deep, guttural groan from the corridor, followed by a series of heavy, shuddering impacts against the reinforced steel door of the surveillance room. The mannequin. It was trying to break in. The paradox had momentarily disrupted the construct on the screen, but the physical threat was still very much present, and apparently enraged. The entire framework of my perceived world, the system of rules and routines, had the emergency lights, which should have kicked in, remained stubbornly dark. The main power grid for the surveillance wing was clearly compromised. My tablet, my only remaining connection to the protocols, was dead, its screen a blank, unresponsive void. I was truly blind, cut off. The only illumination came from the faint red glow of the still-locked Omega lockdown button and the distant, sporadic flashes from the dying monitor. The doorframe shuddered violently with another impact, the steel groaning in protest. It wouldn't hold for long. My meticulously ordered world, governed by rules and schedules, had devolved into primitive, visceral terror. I had to move, to escape, but where? The main corridors were clearly compromised. The refuge, B02, was too close, too obvious. My mind, adrenaline-fueled, latched onto another fragment of memory. The schematics I'd briefly seen in Blake's files, the ones showing the older, decommissioned sections of the complex. Sector Epsilon, where the first anomaly had appeared, was linked to a network of sub-level maintenance tunnels, rarely used, probably forgotten. It was a desperate, almost suicidal plan, but staying here was certain death. The structure that had defined my existence for months had not just failed, it had turned on me. I fumbled for the heavy-duty flashlight I kept clipped to my belt, its beam cutting a nervous swath through the darkness. The impacts on the door were becoming more frenzied, the metal beginning to buckle inwards. There was a secondary access panel concealed behind a false wall chart detailing network architecture, a relic from a previous security setup, one Blake had shown me, just in case. It led to a narrow service crawlspace, which, if memory served, connected to the Epsilon maintenance grid. It was time to abandon the role of watcher, of protocol follower. It was time to become a survivor, to reconfigure my entire understanding of this place and my place within it. The old rules were dead. Now I had to make my own. The panel creaked open, revealing a dusty, cobweb-choked passage barely wide enough to crawl through. The sounds of the mannequin's assault were terrifyingly close. With a final, desperate look at the collapsing sanctuary of the surveillance room, I plunged into the unknown darkness, the flashlight beam my only guide. The system had broken. The hunter was now the hunted, and I, Jake Morgan, was no longer an operator following rules, but a fugitive in a labyrinth run by shadows, armed only with fragmented knowledge and a primal will to live, to somehow get back to Rachel. The crawlspace was a suffocating, claustrophobic nightmare, redolent with the scent of stale air, dust, and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettling, like old blood or rusted machinery. My flashlight beam, jittery and weak, bounced off narrow pipes and bundles of ancient cabling, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that mimicked the horrors I was fleeing. Behind me, I could hear the rending shriek of metal as the mannequin finally breached the surveillance room door. There was no time for regret, no time for fear beyond the immediate animalistic need to put distance between myself and that thing. The complex's underbelly was a forgotten, decaying world, a stark contrast to the sterile, monitored corridors above. Following the faded, barely legible schematics I'd glimpsed in Blake's files, now seared into my memory by sheer terror, I navigated the labyrinthine service tunnels. They twisted and turned, sometimes sloping downwards into even deeper, colder darkness. Several times I reached dead ends, forcing frustrating, time-consuming detours. The silence here was different from the surveillance room's expectant hush. It was the dead, indifferent silence of a place long abandoned by human concern, a silence that nevertheless felt occupied. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not by cameras, but but by the very walls, by the oppressive darkness itself. The crawlspace was a suffocating, claustrophobic nightmare, redolent with the scent of stale air, dust, and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettling. Finally, after what felt like hours of crawling and scrambling, I found it. A rusted, circular hatch with a faded stencil reading Project Blackveil, Sublevel 03, Authorized Personnel Only. This was it. Dr. Emily Carter's forgotten laboratory, the heart of her ill-fated research into the shadow constructs. The hatch was stiff, sealed by years of neglect, but adrenaline lent me a desperate strength. With a groan of protesting metal, it yielded, opening onto a narrow, descending staircase. The air that billowed up was frigid, carrying the same faint, metallic tang I'd noticed in the tunnels, but stronger here, mixed with the crisp, sterile scent of long-disused scientific equipment. The laboratory was a time capsule of abandoned research. Dust lay thick on everything. Overturned chairs, shattered beakers, consoles with dark, lifeless screens. It looked as if Carter, or whoever had been here last, had left in a terrible hurry. Papers were scattered across a central workbench, their edges curled and yellowed. My flashlight beam fell upon a robust, hardened data terminal, miraculously still intact, though coated in a fine layer of grime. It was an older model, likely offline from the main complex network for years. Hope, a fragile, flickering candle in the overwhelming darkness of my situation, ignited within me. With trembling fingers, I wiped away the dust and searched for a power switch. A low hum, a flicker of archaic LEDs, and the screen sputtered to life, displaying a corrupted boot sequence before settling on a heavily fragmented directory. Most files were locked, encrypted, with protocols I couldn't bypass. But one folder, labeled eCarter_personal_logs_unsecured, was accessible. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was Carter's voice, her research, her warnings, preserved in this forgotten tomb. I opened the most recent log file, dated just days before her termination. Log entry 774, the text began. Carter's typed words stark against the sickly green glow of the old monitor. The Blackveil constructs are not merely passively mimetic. They exhibit what I can only describe as predatory data assimilation. They actively seek out and integrate complex information patterns, sensor data, communication logs, even, I suspect, the neural patterns of observers. Blake dismisses my concerns about the emotional resonance factor, but the telemetry from the Sector Gamma mannequin unit after the last high-stress observer event is undeniable. It's learning, adapting. The standard distraction and deflection protocols are becoming less effective. Her words painted a chillingly familiar picture. The false Rachel message, the Blake construct, the mannequin's relentless pursuit, it all fit. The constructs were actively hunting, using emotional vulnerabilities as a targeting system. But then a new section, headed Counter-Cognitive Strategies, Theoretical. Carter had been working on a way to fight back. Current hypothesis: if constructs assimilate patterns, they must also be susceptible to pattern disruption. Not mere noise, but structured, paradoxical data. A Trojan horse of cognitive dissonance. Their processing, while advanced, seems to rely on a form of quantum coherence that is inherently vulnerable to logical contradictions if introduced directly into their assimilation stream. And then the crucial discovery, the one that made my breath catch in my throat. Have completed initial schematics for a Pattern Suppression Unit, PSU. designed to emit a localized high-frequency burst of precisely calibrated paradoxical algorithms. Theoretical range limited, but if deployed at a primary nexus point, a site of high construct energy concentration or data flow, it could, potentially, induce a cascading decoherence event across the local manifestation network. Prototype components secured in Lab Vault 7 Alpha. Activation requires precise waveform calibration based on ambient construct signature. A weapon, a chance, hidden somewhere in this very lab. My gaze swept the darkened laboratory, searching for Vault 7 Alpha. A reinforced steel door, almost invisible in the gloom, was set into the far wall, a heavy combination lock, its only visible feature. The combination. Carter's logs were extensive but fragmented. I scrolled frantically, searching for any clue, any number sequence that might be significant to her. Her birth date? Project initiation date? Then, a small, almost throwaway line in an earlier log about testing sensor arrays. Baseline calibration sequence. Pi, Euler's number, golden ratio, first 5 sig figs. Universal constants. The universe speaks in patterns if we only learn to listen. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. The universe, it seemed, was about to either save me or condemn me. The numbers, those universal constants Dr. Carter had so poetically referenced, echoed in my mind as I approached Vault 7 Alpha. 3.1415, 2.7182. 1.6180. My fingers, slick with a mixture of sweat and grime, fumbled with the cold, unforgiving dial of the combination lock. The silence of the sub-level lab pressed in, each click of the tumblers a small explosion in the oppressive stillness. What if I was wrong? What if this was just another dead end? Another layer of the complex's elaborate, cruel deception. Behind me, the darkness of the tunnels felt thinner, as if the things I had fled were slowly, patiently, seeping back towards this forgotten nexus. The final number clicked into place. I held my breath, pulling on the heavy steel handle. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing. Then, with a low, reluctant groan of disused mechanisms, the vault door swung inward, revealing a small, climate-controlled chamber. And there, resting on a velvet-lined pedestal, as if it were some holy relic, was the Pattern Suppression Unit, the PSU. It was smaller than I'd imagined, a sleek, metallic cylinder covered in an array of unfamiliar input jacks, small unlabeled dials, and a single, ominous-looking activation stud. It pulsed with a faint internal blue light, a stark contrast to the sickly green of Carter's terminal. It felt alien, yet purposeful. As I reached for the PSU, a sudden high-pitched whine emanated from a dusty emergency communicator mounted on the vault wall. The unit, which I'd assumed was as dead as the rest of the lab's primary systems, flared to life, a single red light blinking insistently. A voice, crisp, female, and utterly unfamiliar, cut through the silence. "This is Agent Lauren Bennett, Sovereign Defense Directorate, Command Channel 7. We have detected a catastrophic containment failure and multiple Class 3 shadow construct manifestations at Red River Logistics Complex 7. Identify yourself, survivor. We are initiating immediate exfiltration protocols. Your nearest viable exfiltration point is Fort Ashton Relay Site, grid reference Delta 90. Acknowledge." Sovereign Defense Directorate, SDD. The name Blake had referenced in my faked paradox. They were real, an outside agency aware of the horrors within Red River. For a moment, a wave of overwhelming relief threatened to buckle my knees. rescue, escape. But then I looked at the PSU in my hand, felt its strange, cool thrum. I thought of Carter's notes. Deployed at a primary nexus point, cascading decoherence event. The complex had multiple such nexus points, according to her fragmented schematics, but the largest, the most critical, was the central data core, located directly beneath the main administrative block, not far, ironically, from the surveillance room I had just fled. "Agent Bennett," I said, my voice hoarse, unfamiliar even to myself after hours of silence and terror. "This is Jake Morgan, Nocturnal Vigilance Operator. I have Dr. Emily Carter's pattern suppression unit. Her logs indicate it can disrupt the constructs if activated at a nexus point." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Carter's PSU? We thought that was a theoretical. Morgan, that device is unproven." But her words, unproven, unstable, also carried an echo of Carter's own desperate hope. This wasn't just about my survival anymore. It was about Rachel, yes, but it was also about Dr. Carter's sacrifice, about the possibility, however slim, of stopping these things, not just running from them. If I fled now, the constructs would remain, would continue to learn, to adapt, to spread. The SDD might contain this outbreak, but for how long? Carter had believed in this device. She had died for it. And I, the sensitive node, the beacon, might be the only one who could get it where it needed to go, who could understand the ambient construct signature well enough to calibrate it. "Agent Bennett," I said, my decision solidifying with a cold, terrifying certainty. "I appreciate the extraction offer, but the central data core is the primary nexus. Carter's logs are specific. If this PSU has a chance, it's there. I'm going to try." A string of curses, sharp and professional, crackled from the communicator. "Morgan, you are not authorized. You are not trained. You will only get yourself killed and potentially make the situation worse. That is an order." But the order felt distant, irrelevant. The rules of Red River were broken. The rules of the SDD, they didn't understand what I had seen, what I now knew. I placed the PSU carefully into my jacket pocket, its cool weight a strange reassurance. "Negative, Agent Bennett. I'm going in. If this works, you'll know. If it doesn't, well, it won't much matter for me, will it?" I reached out and, with a decisive click, severed the connection, plunging the vault and my future back into a silence charged with a terrible, exhilarating purpose. The path to the central data core would be through the heart of the complex, through corridors undoubtedly swarming with whatever the mannequin and its kin had become. It was a suicide mission. But as I stepped out of Dr. Carter's forgotten lab, the PSU a cold promise against my ribs, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months. Not hope, exactly, but the grim satisfaction of defiance. I was no longer just running. I was hunting. The journey back towards the central administrative block was a descent into a Dantean vision of the complex. The emergency lights, where they still functioned, cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. Corridors that had been merely unsettling on the monitors were now actively hostile, the air thick with a palpable sense of menace. I could hear them, the constructs, skittering in the ventilation shafts, whispering from the darkened doorways, their presence a constant, chilling pressure on my senses. The PSU in my pocket seemed to pulse faintly, as if responding to their proximity. Carter's notes on ambient construct signature calibration flashed through my mind. The device was already learning, adapting. And so, terrifyingly, was I. The central data core was less a room and more a cathedral of information, a vast, cavernous space deep beneath the administrative block, filled with towering racks of servers that hummed with a discordant, almost pained energy. Cables thick as pythons snaked across the floor and ceiling, pulsing with a faint, sickly luminescence, not of electricity, but of something else. The air was arctic, yet carried a strange organic scent, like damp earth and ozone. This was the heart of Red River's digital consciousness, and it was, undeniably, horrifically infected. The shadow constructs were not just in the periphery. They were woven into the very fabric of this place. And it was there, waiting, the mannequin. Or what had once been the mannequin. It stood in the center of the core, before the primary server array, but its form was no longer smooth or defined. It was a shifting, chaotic mass of solidified shadow, tendrils of darkness coiling and uncoiling from its core, some lashing out to physically connect with the server racks, drawing power, drawing data. Other, more ephemeral shapes flickered around it. "So, the little observer returns," a voice echoed through the core, seeming to emanate from all the servers at once, a chorus of 1,000 Blakes, 1,000 whispers, 1,000 distorted echoes of Dr. Carter. It was the voice of the complex itself, the voice of the assimilated, the consumed. "You bring a new toy, Jake Morgan. Dr. Carter's desperate little gambit. She, too, thought she could suppress us. She learned, as you will, that we are not an error to be corrected. We are the inevitable. We are the pattern beneath the noise, the silence that consumes all signals." The Rachel phantom drifted closer, its eyes empty yet fixated on me. "Don't fight, Jake. It's so cold out there. Here, we are connected. We are one." My hands, numb with cold and terror, fumbled with the PSU. Carter's notes had been vague on the final calibration, mentioning only the need to attune its paradoxical waveform to the dominant local construct signature, and then introduce a resonant human emotional constant as an anchor. The device in my hand was pulsing faster now, its blue light intensifying, the dials on its surface flickering with readings I couldn't comprehend. The air crackled with unseen energies. The dominant signature, it was everywhere, a symphony of fear, of assimilated data, of cold, alien intellect. But the anchor, what human constant could possibly stand against this? The mannequin construct, the central mass of shadow, extended a tendril towards me, a whip of pure darkness that sizzled as it cut through the air. I dodged, barely, the acrid scent of its passage burning my nostrils. The Rachel phantom glided to block my path, its small, translucent hand reaching out. "Don't you love me, Jake? Don't you want to save me?" The voice was a perfect imitation, laced with a child's desperate plea. My resolve wavered. The grief, the guilt, the overwhelming love I felt for my sister. It was a raw, open wound, and the constructs were pouring salt into it, using my deepest emotions as a weapon. But then, through the fog of manipulated grief, another memory of Rachel surfaced. Not her illness, not her fear, but her fierce, unwavering defiance. The way she'd fought every setback, every painful procedure, with a spirit that had shamed my own despair. Her laughter, when she could manage it, was a rebellion against the encroaching darkness. That was her constant. Not her pain, but her will. Her unwavering, stubborn, beautiful will to be. And my promise to her, the one I'd made at her hospital bedside, that I would do anything to give her a fighting chance, that I would never, ever give up on her. That was my constant. "I do love her," I choked out, my voice raw, tears streaming down my face, freezing in the Arctic air of the core. "And that's why I won't let you be her. That's why I won't let you use her." I focused all my will, all my love, all my desperate, defiant hope for Rachel into a single burning point in my mind, picturing her not as the victim, but as the fighter. I slammed my thumb down on the PSU's activation stud. The small dials on its surface spun wildly, the blue light within it flaring to an almost blinding intensity. The PSU wasn't just a machine. Carter had designed it to channel something more. For a moment, nothing happened. The mannequin construct paused, its shadowy tendrils retracting slightly, as if sensing a change. The Rachel phantom flickered, its form becoming less stable. Then a sound began to build. Not a sound I could hear with my ears, but one that resonated deep within my bones. A discordant, reality-bending shriek of conflicting, paradoxical information patterns being broadcast on a frequency I couldn't imagine. The PSU in my hand grew searingly hot. The server racks around the core began to spark and overload, their indicator lights flashing in a chaotic, uncontrolled frenzy. The central mannequin construct recoiled, its shadowy form visibly destabilizing, fragmenting, as if the paradoxical algorithms were ripping apart its quantum coherence. It thrashed, tendrils of darkness flailing, striking server racks and sending showers of sparks into the air. The ghostly apparitions, including the Rachel phantom, wailed and dissolved like smoke in a hurricane. The chorus of voices that had filled the core fractured into a million dissonant shrieks, then abruptly cut off. The PSU pulsed one last brilliant time, emitting a wave of pure, silent disruption that washed through the core. And then it went dark, its surface cold and inert. The only sound left was the dying crackle of overloaded circuits and my own ragged, gasping breaths. The silence that descended upon the central data core was profound, a vacuum where moments before a symphony of terror had reigned. The towering server racks, once thrumming with malevolent energy and adorned with coiling shadows, were now largely dark, many emitting thin tendrils of smoke, their indicator lights either extinguished or blinking erratically in distress. The oppressive Arctic chill remained, but the palpable sense of a sentient, hostile presence had receded. It wasn't gone, not entirely. I could still feel a faint, residual thrum in the very foundations of the complex, like the fading echo of a monstrous heartbeat. But the immediate, overwhelming threat had been broken. The mannequin construct, the focal point of the infection, had vanished, leaving behind only a faint, lingering scent of ozone and something indescribably ancient. I collapsed against a thankfully inert server rack, the now dead PSU clattering from my numb fingers. Exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness that went far beyond physical fatigue, threatened to pull me under. Every nerve ending screamed, my mind a raw, jangled mess from the psychic assault and the sheer, unadulterated terror of the last few hours. The image of the Rachel phantom, its desperate, false plea, still burned behind my eyelids. Had I truly anchored the PSU with my love for her? Or had I, in my desperation, risked something far more profound, offered up a piece of my soul to power Carter's desperate machine? The thought was a cold sliver of dread in the aftermath of the chaos. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself to my feet. The emergency lighting in the data core, surprisingly, flickered to life. A dim, unreliable orange glow, but light nonetheless. The primary systems were fried, but some ancillary power must have rerouted. My first coherent thought was of escape. The SDD, Agent Bennett. I had cut off communication, defied a direct order. Would they still be waiting, or had they written me off as another casualty of Red River? Another ghost to haunt its digital corridors? I retrieved the inert PSU, its surface now cold and unresponsive, and tucked it back into my jacket. It felt different now, not a weapon, but a relic, a testament to a battle fought in the liminal spaces between mind and machine. The journey back through the complex was surreal. The oppressive sense of being watched had lessened, replaced by an eerie, almost mournful emptiness. The skittering sounds in the vents were gone. The whispering shadows had retreated. It was as if activating the PSU had not just disrupted the constructs, but had also muted the complex, forced it into a state of temporary shock. Some corridors were still dark, others lit by the same erratic emergency lights. I passed the surveillance room, its door a mangled wreck of torn steel. Inside, the monitors were all shattered, the consoles smoking ruins. The place where my nightmare had truly begun was now just another casualty. Reaching the designated exfiltration point, Fort Ashton Relay Site, a surprisingly mundane prefab building just outside the main perimeter fence of Red River, felt like stepping from a nightmare into a stark, unwelcome reality. Two figures in tactical gear, faces grim, stood by an unmarked black vehicle. Agent Lauren Bennett was one of them, her expression a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. The other was an old... They didn't debrief me there. Not really. Just a few terse questions about the PSU, about what I had seen, what I had done. I was too exhausted, too emotionally raw, to offer more than fragmented, disjointed answers. Bennett retrieved the dead PSU with an almost reverent care, placing it in a specialized, shielded case. Dr. Carter would have been impressed, she said, the first hint of something other than professional detachment in her voice. And likely horrified. You took an incredible risk, Morgan. I could only nod. The full weight of that risk, of what I'd unleashed and what I'd confronted, only just beginning to settle in. As the black vehicle sped away from Red River, leaving the silent, brooding complex behind in the pre-dawn gloom, Commander Cross finally spoke. What you did in there, Morgan, you achieved a localized spectral field reset. The primary construct manifestations within Hub 7 have been neutralized, or at least forced into a dormant, dispersed state. It's unprecedented. He paused, then added, the PSU is inert, as Carter predicted. A one-shot device, its core matrix likely burned out by the feedback loop. So, no easy weapon for future encounters. Each battle would require a new sacrifice, a new desperate gamble. I felt a profound shift within myself, a change that went deeper than mere exhaustion. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been my companion for months, the pressure in my mind when I was near the complex's systems, had subtly altered. It wasn't gone, but it was clearer, as if a filter had been removed, or rather, as if I could now perceive the static of the world, the underlying patterns of information and energy with a new, uncomfortable clarity. I hadn't just fought the shadow constructs, I had, in some small, terrifying way, become attuned to their frequency, to the very fabric of their existence. The transfer was complete. I had looked into the abyss, and a sliver of its understanding had looked back and taken root. 3 months have passed since that night, since the chaotic symphony of the Central Data Core and the silent, desperate journey out of Red River Logistics Complex 7. The Sovereign Defense Directorate, true to Commander Cross's initial assessment, did not simply let me walk away. My old life, the one where I was just Jake Morgan, struggling to pay for Rachel's treatments by staring at silent screens, was over. That Jake had died somewhere in the dust and darkness of Dr. Carter's forgotten lab, or perhaps in the blinding, paradoxical light of the PSU's activation. The man who emerged was something else, someone else. My new office is a sterile, windowless room deep within SDD's regional headquarters, a place that makes Red River's surveillance hub look like a cozy den. My official title is Anomalous Pattern Analyst, a typically anodyne bureaucratic label for a job that is anything but. My primary task is to sift through global data streams, through the digital detritus of our hyper-connected world, searching for the subtle, almost imperceptible signatures of nascent shadow construct activity. My attunement, as Commander Cross delicately calls it, the lingering echo of my encounter in the data core, makes me uniquely, uncomfortably suited for this. I can see the ripples in the static, feel the cold touch of their nascent consciousness in a way their most sophisticated algorithms cannot. Director Susan Whitker, the enigmatic head of the SDD, keeps a close, if distant, watch on my progress. She granted my conditions. Rachel is receiving the best possible care at a secure, specialized facility. Her condition stabilized, though a true cure remains elusive. The SDD's resources are considerable. It's a gilded cage, perhaps, but one that keeps Rachel safe, and for that, I endure the sterile confines, the endless screens, now filled not with empty corridors, but with cascading lines of code, with complex telemetry from a dozen hidden monitoring posts around the globe. Dr. Michael Bennett, Agent Bennett's brilliant but reclusive brother, has become my primary scientific liaison, fascinated and slightly unnerved by my intuitive grasp of construct behavior. The spectral field reset at Red River was, as predicted, temporary. The complex itself is now under SDD quarantine, a silent, brooding monument to what was and what will inevitably be again. Our long-range sensors indicate that the dormant construct consciousness within its systems is slowly, glacially beginning to stir, to reassert its patterns. The PSU's effect was a stunning blow, a disruption on a scale they hadn't anticipated from a mere human. But the shadow constructs are ancient, patient, and terrifyingly adaptive. They learn from every encounter, every defeat. And they learned a great deal from me. I still have a tablet, not the battered relic from Red River, but a sleek SDD-issued device. It too contains rules, protocols, not for monitoring empty warehouses, but for identifying, analyzing, and escalating potential construct incursions. I help write some of them now, drawing on that cold, hard-won knowledge. The irony is not lost on me. I traded one set of chains for another, perhaps more sophisticated, but chains nonetheless. The fight is no longer confined to a single haunted complex in the Nevada desert. It's global, insidious, fought in the unseen networks that underpin our reality. Sometimes, late at night, when the data streams blur and the hum of the SDD servers becomes a low, monotonous drone, I feel it. That faint, familiar pressure at the edges of my perception. A whisper in the static. A coldness in the code. They remember me, and I them. The mannequin, the Blake construct, the heartbreakingly false image of Rachel, they are seared into my memory, not just as horrors, but as lessons. Lessons in deception, in vulnerability, and in the terrifying adaptability of an intelligence that operates on principles we are only just beginning to comprehend. The fear is still there, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of my carefully constructed composure. But it's tempered now with a grim resolve. I am no longer just a victim, a pawn. I am a sentinel of a different kind, watching not for flickering shadows on a screen, but for the far more dangerous shadows that lurk within the very patterns of our world. Project Blackveil was just the beginning. Red River was just one battle. The war for the integrity of our reality, for the sanctity of our own thoughts and emotions, is a silent, ongoing struggle. Last week, Dr. Michael Bennett showed me a disturbing new data pattern emanating from a decommissioned research facility in the Ural Mountains. Faint at first, but growing in coherence, exhibiting familiar mimetic signatures. And then, this morning, a subtle, almost imperceptible anomaly in the secure network traffic of the very hospital where Rachel is being treated. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, tightened its grip around my heart. It could be nothing, a glitch, coincidence, or it could be them, testing, probing, reaching out from the digital ether, drawn once more to the beacon of my deepest connection, my greatest vulnerability. The screens in my new office flicker, and I lean closer, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The rules have changed. The game is afoot, and I will be ready.